for two. Kickers are extra, I give them the boot. Ooh, going for two. Sit back, relax while I grab me a brew. Ooh, now I'm reclining while putting my time and I'm ready to go. My spine is aligning and much my lineups, my bank account grow. I am so rich, but knowledge is all that I'm leaving it with. Ooh, listen to this, multiple options, how far can I get? Ooh, DFS Dynasty redraft tonight, I'm not finishing last. I'm finishing past any and all, I am looking to last. What else? This spot is popping and I am so locked in and only opening the door when it is opportunity knocking. And all of these spots keep on talking and talking. So what are we talking? What kind of alignment? And running it deep, even players forgotten or came from the bottom or hitting that top. And this spot is popping, yeah, this spot is popping. And woo! This is the armchair, yeah. Put up your arms, yeah. Sound the alarm, yeah, yeah, yeah. Woo!
What is going on? Welcome to episode 273 of the Armchair Fantasy Show. It is a special tonight. We are doing a Friday night show before the season. I'm here as always with my two co-hosts. But first up, let me just mention we are part of the Going for Two Live podcast network. And we are going to be live every Wednesday and Friday night during the season on Facebook Live, YouTube, Twitter. On Twitter. Unfortunately, comments do not work on Twitter anymore, so go find us on that is YouTube /Going for Two Live. Make sure you hit the button while you're there. As I mentioned, my two co-hosts tonight. First up, we got Mr. Tim Strobel. You can follow him on Twitter at KetoDFS. What's up, man?
Man, I'm so happy to be back. Football season is right around the corner, man. We're week one. I know everybody's real hyped. It's one of my favorite shows we do all year, getting everybody ready for the season, talking a little strategy.
Yes,
just
sir.
So happy to be back, man.
Yes, sir. And, of course, Gerson on Twitter at FantasyGDFS. So Gerson's about 45 pounds less Gerson than we had last year, right, Gerson? Is that where we're at now, 45 or close to it?
Yeah, about 45. Yeah, man, I had to make a change. Had to lose some weight, because I knew football season was coming. So during football, it's about barbecue, beers, and a lot of late nights on the computer for research. But yeah, I'm glad to be back. I'm ready. And cheers, guys. Here's the beer for first beer.
Yes, sir.
Absolutely,
Yes, sir.
man.
Cheers that. So something that we haven't had before. So I've been in the Scott Fish Bowl now for I think it's my 5th year. But this is the first year that all three of us are going to be in the Scott Fish Bowl.
Yes, sir.
So tell me just real quick,
Scott
guys.
Fish Bowl.
There you go. And Gerson's got his on too. I'd have mine on, but unfortunately I came straight from work right into the studio, so I didn't have time to get mine put on. But yeah, so real quick, guys, just give us your sort of experience so far with Scott Fish Bowl. We'll go to you first, Tim.
Yeah, I told you guys a little bit. We had a crazy draft experience. For those who don't play in Scott Fish Bowl, it is a slow draft. And we had a guy in our draft who was determined to not make it a slow draft. He would message you, tag you multiple times if you were up on the clock. He would send all kind of messages about how you're a disappointment to your family. And it was just all kinds of nonsense. But I absolutely loved it. It was an excellent experience. And I really love my division. Shout out to Los Santos Grand Theft Auto.
Nice, good stuff. Gerson, what about you?
First off, this is a charity event, so to be doing that kind of stuff is disrespectful, and it takes away from what we're trying to do. Come together as a community. But dude, I played Scott Fish Bowl Satellite the last 4 years now.
Yeah,
a lot of fun. I've always placed either in the top 3, I believe. But the draft was fine. I mean, it was good. It was fun. It did take a little longer than I expected. I mean, I'm kind of jealous when I get messages from Jeff or Ryan or other people that they say, "Oh, dude, I'm in the 10th round. Check this out." I'm barely making my second pick, bro. You leave me alone. And then a couple of days later, they'll be like, "Hey, so what is your team looking like?" Only one more player more than last time, bro. But the funny thing is, me and Jeff probably have very identical team because we drafted from the same spot, and we also had the same kind of situation land in our hand. I believe you got double tight end. I went double tight end.
Yep.
And then we went quarterback, right?
Yep. Yeah, it definitely was not planning to get double tight end. I wanted to get one tight end in the first 2 rounds, and I was hoping to get that in the second round, and I expected to be either Kyle Pitts or Darren Waller, one of those. But then Mark Andrews fell to me. So I was like, well, I'll take Mark Andrews, and then come around in the third, and Kyle Pitts is still sitting there. I'm like, well, shit, I'll just take the double tight ends.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I got both of those guys too, Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts, and I was like, dang, I can't. Like, the thing is, if you play Scott Fishbowl, tight ends are like basically the second most valuable position next to quarterback, I'd say.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not even, and it's pretty close too. I mean, like, sometimes that tight end, what is it, double 2 points?
I think it's
1.5.
Yeah, no, I think it's half point PPR normally, and tight ends get a full point for PPR.
Right, okay.
But then they also get the extra point for first downs too. Like, I think every place that gets 1 point for a first down, tight ends get, I think, 2 points for a first down. So yeah, definitely good stuff. All right, we got a new sponsor, so let me go ahead and get into our new sponsor here. So if you're like us, you play a bunch of DFS lineups, then you really need to focus on Sunday mornings when you're building your lineups. Dubby energy drinks can help. Dubby is a clean energy with no jitters, no crash, and no BS. Visit dubby.gg and use our promo code GF2 and get 10% off. All their drinks have their patented neurofactor, which is designed to help you focus and stay alert. Currently available in 4 flavors, including the most popular Dragonade, which combines dragon fruit, pink strawberry starburst, and lemonade for a sweet but slightly sour taste. So visit dubby.gg and use promo code GF2. Get Dubby energy and be better. All right, so tonight we're going to be doing a little bit of strategy talk here. We haven't done one of these shows in a little while. You got a lot of new people that start DFS around this time of year. They start, week 1, week 2. They'll be there. They'll be heavy in there. We want to help them win, because if they win, they come back and they keep playing, and it just makes it a lot of fun. So we're going to help you the best we can here to teach you some basic strategies. And if you watch our show during the year, we talk about these strategies all the time on our shows. And the first one really is going to come up, and this one's probably familiar to those who play even regular fantasy football, but stacking. Tim, I'm going to go to you first on stacking and what it means and how you approach it in DFS.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's been, a number of, I don't say studies is the right word, but people have done some analysis and shown that if you're, getting into the top 1% of these massive tournaments, you're doing it by stacking your lineups. And by stacking, I mean, you're usually having your quarterback along with 1 or 2 or more pass catchers that you are pairing with that quarterback. Because, if you're looking for one of these games to shoot out, you're trying to capture all of the points in that game. So sometimes, if you're going to score, quarterback's going to throw for 4 touchdowns, your guy only has 2, the other guy's got 2. You need both of them to differentiate in your lineups as well. So there's a lot of advantage to stacking. You get the most upside possible. And some people are still scared to put multiple people from the same team. We'll talk about that later in their lineup. And so sometimes you can get a little bit of an advantage there as well.
Yeah, stacking is really, Gerson, I'm going to go to you next here. Stacking is really a tournament strategy. I mean, it's used in other things too, but it's more about the tournament style, trying to capitalize on the most amount of points. How do you approach stacking, and how do you decide what games you want to stack?
So one of the things that's gotten popular over the years, probably the last 2 years to be exact, game stack. Like, we're not talking about just like, let's stack Derek Carr, Devontae Adams, Dan Waller, and then bring it back with I don't even know who the Raiders are playing week 1, but
Chargers.
Bring it back with Mike Williams. Now people are doing, let's do it every different way possible. Running back, wide receiver, tight end, they don't care no more about running back's negative correlation to a stack, because a running back doesn't get that much pass catching. They care about getting all the touchdowns now. Yeah. That's what stacking is. You get your highest, your lineup's going to be very volatile at times, but the thing is, that lineup, as long as you have a floor, you can have a high ceiling. And that's what I'm looking for, a high ceiling, because say Josh Allen gets 400 points. Wow. 400 pass yards and 4 touchdowns. I guarantee you those are going to go to his wide receivers and his tight end and running back, Probably not his running back, because he always just doesn't really pass to his running back very much. But he does, like, it's going to go to his receivers. And obviously, you want to get that stack. And the funny thing is, like I tell people now, stacking, you don't have to have the most expensive guy. You can have an Isaiah McKenzie, probably like minimum price, and he has a ceiling of maybe 8 points, 10 points for the week. Well, if he gets that touchdown, that's 18 point at 3,500. Wow, that's hitting the money right there. But that allows you to stack backwards to probably like, say Cooper Kupp on week 1. So like it's just stack to me. Not only game stack, you want to have, if you're playing 150 lineup, you want to have very different exposure to different games.
Yeah, and I think he kind of hit on the key point at the end there, which is this is you can stack in your cash games and in some of your league games and smaller tournaments, but when we're talking about double stacks and especially game onslaughts and stuff like that, it's because you're trying to get in the top 1% of these big tournaments, right? Because that's where all the money is. So you not only have to have a lineup that scores all the points, but you have to be different as well, right? And so we'll talk about a little bit here, strategy moving forward and kind of how to capture that. But, when we're talking about some of these strategies, I think the biggest thing is talking about what kind of tournament you're really going for, or, what kind of contest, I should say, you're going for. Is this a cash game? Is this a league game with 20 people? Is this a 200 person tournament or a 200,000 person tournament? I think the lineup changes, or the lineup strategy changes a little bit for each of those different scenarios.
Agreed. And Tim, you kind of touched on this. Our next thing here is correlation, and it kind of goes hand in hand with stacking, like you mentioned. Bringing it back is a term that we use a lot. So let's take Gerson's example of Josh Allen throwing for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. He's got Stephon Diggs catching a touchdown. Maybe he's got Gabe Davis catching a touchdown, Dawson Knox catching a touchdown. Well, the game is high scoring. So the thought process is the other teams, they have to also score to keep pace. So you want to have the bring back, have the guy on the other side of the equation here. So talk a little bit about correlation in a single lineup. There's also multi-lineup correlations, which I'll get Gerson to talk about. But if you can kind of talk about a little bit single lineup correlations.
Yeah, well, this kind of gets into something that I don't see you have on the sheet, but I wanted to talk about anyway. Actually, you do. You have it down there at 7, but I'm going to skip ahead, and that's Vegas, right? The first thing that I look at when I'm building a lineup is I look at Vegas, because I want to know what lineup, what games are expected to score the highest. Because there may be scenarios where they're playing against a team where I think they could score 40 points, but the other team is going to score 12, right? I mean, that's probably an extreme scenario, but like, I may not always want to run it back. Where there are going to be games like the one I just talked about, the Raiders and Chargers game week 1, I expect to be a pretty high scoring game. In that game, you want to try and capture all the points. So you want to build correlated lineups, right? Lineups where I like to say, tell a story, right? So, okay, there was 50 points scored in that game. How did those 50 points get scored? Well, Derek Carr had 3 touchdowns through the air. Austin Eckler had 3 touchdowns on the ground. You captured all of those points in your lineup, and now you have a real shot at a tournament win.
Yeah, that's a good call. And Gerson, this is something that, when you first brought this up a couple years ago with correlations in multiple lineups, something that I hadn't really thought about, because I don't build the multi-lineups like you do, but correlating your multiple lineups as far as, if you're having a high-scoring game, playing, both sides of the coin there. So give me your thoughts on there and kind of explain correlation in multi-lineups.
So correlation, basically, to make it the shorter way, is and I already know I'm probably going to say the longer way too. So the shorter way, basically, you want to do quarterback, wide receiver, or tight end, wide receiver, tight end, and then bring it back with one of the other opponents, wide receiver, tight end. Of course, we're going to be stacking the highest scoring game. We're going to be stacking, we're going to look for correlation. Correlation is basically going to give you the highest ceiling to maximize your point going both ways. Usually, if a quarterback is projected very high and the other quarterback is projected very high, which I always call it a quarterback correlation, that means those wide receivers on both sides of the ball are going to score a lot. But to me, correlation is very key component. There's different ways you can do it. You can do running back defense, which is a good correlation sometimes. You got to pick your spots, though. There's quarterback, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, wide receiver, running back. You usually try to do pass catching running back like an Austin Eckler, or DeAndre Swift, or I guess Leonard Fournette last year. But there's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of research out there about correlations. Just Google it. I promise you it's out there, and it's free. Like, there's a lot of websites out there. Best advice we can give you is correlation is like keen. Stacking is keen in GPP. You're not going to win a tournament without stacking. I think I've seen one time where there was a non-stack in the Million Maker, and it was a ridiculous lineup. The guy picked like every perfect.
Was it the Cam Newton one?
Yes. And
he drafted Cam Newton, and then every other single player was the optimum in slot.
Wow.
I remember that week. It was crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
It can happen. Like, it can happen. Like, I mean, let's be honest.
It's very rare, though. Like, we remember it because it's so rare, right?
Yep. But stacking is keen in GPPs. I do want to make a statement on the 3-person tournament, the 20-person tournament, and even you're playing your buddies. Like we had last year, the arena.
Yeah.
Over 25 people, 30 people. And in those tournaments, so I always say this is my advice. The lower the number, the less riskier you want to be, and more just go for those projected points, like high ownership plays and safe, and just get a little different. The higher the number, 3,000, 50,000 people, you got to be different. You got to have 3 plays that are going to be under, 5 to 10% ownership. But that's just my opinion. GPP is really hard. It's not easy. I mean, if this GPP tournament winning Million Makers every week was easy, trust me, me and Tim and Jeff, we wouldn't be working right now.
We're living the good life. I would be live from Hawaii right now or something.
Exactly.
Hey, we did touch on something I don't want to skip past real quick. So, when we talk about correlation, we're generally talking about correlated lineups and, quarterback, like he said, stacking and correlating with their, pass catchers. But I also want to talk about correlation between individual positions and points scored, because like running backs, wide receivers, even tight ends to a lesser extent can get there based purely on volume, right? Like it's usually the ones that score a bunch of touchdowns that win you the week, but we've seen those crazy weeks where dudes have gone off on purely volume. Quarterbacks have to be efficient to really win you the week, right? Unless it's going to be Lamar or somebody like that who runs for 100+ yards, like your quarterback is going to win a week by scoring 4 or 5 touchdowns. And that's why it's so important to capture all of those touchdowns in order to have, a real shot. Trying to call, when Lamar is going to have a 300-100 game is tough, but trying to call when, like last year, we were all over Brady stacks and Stafford stacks because they just, they kept just throwing 35, 42 points or, a week. And you just got to capture all that, all those touchdowns. So it's about knowing what quarterbacks best correlate with their pass catchers and which ones you may, I don't know necessarily run naked, but which quarterbacks may not support a double stack. Let me put it that way.
Yeah. And run naked is a term that, everybody uses, but not everybody knows what it means. Running naked basically means you're not stacking your quarterback. If you have a quarterback with none of his passing options and you're running your quarterback naked. And I want to go back real quick on something Gerson touched on too with correlations and far as correlation in multiple lineups. And really what that means is almost like stacking it different ways. Obviously you have the quarterback from one side and you think it's gonna be a high scoring game. You're playing multiple lineups, stack one lineup with other guys from that same game. So you have that same correlation from the other side of the thing. So let's say it's the Raiders and the Chargers week 1. You'd have a Herbert, Eckler, Keenan Allen stack on one side. And then in a different lineup, you would do David Carr, Devontae Adams, and correlate the things that way as well. So just to kind of touch on that, I do want to jump into just the differences here in cash games versus GPP. It's something that we kind of take it for granted when we talk about it. It's terminology that if you're new to the game, you may not even know what those terms mean. So I'll go to you first, Tim, on this because I know you're more of a cash game player, kind of like me. So give me your thoughts on cash games and what you think of a cash game.
Yeah, Jason isn't on the show, so I'll be the fill-in cash game expert. But yeah, I think cash games, as Gerson kind of touched on a minute ago, are a completely different strategy than GPPs or even league games to an extent, um, because you don't really care about ownership, right? And a lot of times you're trying to play the most owned plays because they're usually the best plays for a reason, right? Like we call it the chalk, right? And in tournaments, you don't, you want a mixture or some chalk, or you can't have all of it because, like you said, you have to be different in order to get all the way up there. But in cash games, you don't care, right? You're trying to, some people say it's points per dollar, but you're really just trying to cram as much value into one lineup as possible, right? And we'll talk about value a little bit here in a minute, but cash games, 50-50, you're only trying to beat half the people. I think for double ups, you're trying to beat, I don't know, what is it, 52, 55% of the people. But I mean, it's not, it pays the same whether you're first or the last one to cash, right? There's no advantage to coming in first. So there's not, like Gerson was talking about, there's not a lot of advantage to putting risk in your lineups, right? You want good, safe plays that are going to, and let the other people make the mistakes, right? Like, some people say that cash games these days is really just kind of like almost a chalk test, right? Who knows what the chalk is, and then who will actually play it, and who thinks that they're smarter than the chalk, right? So every week it's kind of a dance, and we talk about it in our chat, we talk about it in our group, that cash games are all about kind of deciding who's gonna, who's the chalk you're gonna play and who's the chalk you're gonna fade. And whereas in tournaments, you get a lot more creativity because you're not trying to just cash, right? And Gerson will tell you, right? I don't think long term you can be profitable in tournaments if you're just trying to cash, right? You have to be going for that top 1% where all the money is, or you'll never be profitable long term. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and you guys will see, like, we'll have some crazy takes, maybe takes that people aren't on in other places, but it's because we've done our research and we trust our instincts. We play the plays that we say. We don't. I mean, I'm not gonna be one of those guys that writes out an article or goes on a podcast and says, "Play this guy, play that guy," and next thing you know, you go find me on one of those apps or websites, and I'm not even playing. I'm playing. But the thing is, it's like cash game to me. I'm not a big cash game player, but I could give you advice on cash game because I know the safer plays. There's a lot of things out there. There's value. There's ownership. There's the games are going to be targeted. The players that are going to be owned and everything. It's very basic, but at the same time, it's like a train. Everybody's following the same players. You just got to figure out what positions you want to be different at and beat that leverage on that, on that roster. If I was playing cash game, I always try to be different at defense and quarterback.
Yeah.
Because I'm very different at defense, and then my defense is either low score, very low owned, or they get a different amount of points than that high scoring defense that's projected, and then all of a sudden that high scoring defense only got you 4 points or 2 points, and then my low scoring defense, my low price defense got me 6 points. I'm already beating the leverage upon you. And then on quarterback, who the quarterback play is from week. You go to the Vegas, you look at there it is. That's the guy I want. And in cash game, quarterback salary almost doesn't matter. Like, it can be the highest scoring quarterback or the lowest. I mean, the highest price quarterback or the lowest price quarterback. You just have to pick a direction,
Yep. Agreed. So flipping over to GPPs, Gerson, of course, that stands for, guaranteed prize pool. Those are your big tournaments there. And we obviously kind of touched on a little bit about, how you build, higher volatile lineups, trying to get to that top 1% there. Is there anything else that you look at when you're setting your 150 max lineups? Is there anything else that for GPPs that you're trying to hit on? Is there a certain kind of players you're looking for?
I think and this is crazy to say that the edge is slim now, because 3 years ago, you had less tools, ownership didn't even exist. Ownership exposure didn't even exist 4 years ago. You had tools like, and I'm not giving them a shout out or anything, but there's a tool called Fantasy Cruncher, probably the best tool in the industry to me, in my opinion. And it allows you to make different rules, with different settings, and has the best projection. But to me, GPP, it all comes down to projection.
Yeah.
Whatever projection numbers you have for your player that week is what's going to make you a difference in your lineup. Someone else could have Derrick Henry for 25 points, and then someone else can have Elijah Mitchell for 20 points. And maybe Elijah Mitchell is $4,000 cheaper. It all depends how your projection is. To me, I have 5 things that I look for in a GPP roster. Number 1, Vegas. Number 2, stacking. Number 3, ownership. Number 4 is leverage ownership. And leverage ownership has been really successful for me the last, 2 years, 3 years. Basically what that is, it's just basically trying to figure out where the field is going and where I want to go the opposite way. What game they're targeting and what other game I don't want to. What game I want to fade or go. And it's funny because last year I was on that Joe Burrow train for so many weeks, and it kept hitting. But then at the time, the time I went all in on them, they didn't hit. But it happened with the Dallas Cowboys too. But that, and then number 5, of course, is, and this is not even more of a strategy thing. This is more of a tip. Be ready Sunday morning for news, injuries, any tidbits you can get. And shameless plug. Just tune in on the Sunday show at the Armchair.
Who's on that Sunday show, Gerson?
This year we're gonna have
he never remembers.
No, I have no idea. It's gonna be Jamie. Shout out, he's on the chat row right now. Gladys and Zach, right? I don't know how do you say it?
Zach. Yep. The Big Pulowski. We're all going to be on there. We're excited. We had a team meeting yesterday, and we are ecstatic to host the Sunday show with you guys. But like I always say, come to the Sunday show because I'm going to give you the answer to the test, But get Twitter. Get Twitter, please. Yeah, definitely.
You're not a serious NBA player if you're not on right before lock, and you're not a serious NFL player if you're not ready to go Sunday morning. But I do want to talk about a couple things that he touched on. One is approaching these different tournament styles, right? I think if you're going to do like the big 150 max Millie Maker type lineups, like Gerson said, you're probably not doing that by hand, right? You're using an optimizer, you're using a projection set. Everything really comes down to your projection set. And like Gerson said, the settings that you put into your optimizer. So if anybody out there is new and they're thinking, oh, I'm just going to, buy an optimizer and hit run and it's going to give me the best lineup. I mean, Gerson will tell you the years and hours and hours and hours he set into getting these settings exactly the way that he wants. So he could do a whole show on customizing your 150 lineup settings and getting your stack, and all of those things. But I'm going to do a quick shout out for the people like me, with the hand builders, if you will. I think that if you're doing like one lineup a week or 3 lineups a week, I think that you probably are approaching them differently than you would for 150 max, right? Because you are, particularly, like I said, if you're doing it in let's do a 3 max tournament, right? This isn't you putting 3 entries into a 150 tournament, which is probably usually not a good idea. This is you actually going into a 3 max tournament and saying, I want to approach it that way. I think the best way to do that is probably finding 3 lesser owned game stacks. Like he said, it's not about finding these crazy plays that nobody's on. It's about finding really good plays that not enough people are on. And I want to give a shout out real quick to Jared Good, who's in the chat, who, he took down the mini max last year for 15K. And in that lineup was Tyreek Hill. And Tyreek Hill is always a good play, but that particular week, he wasn't seen as the best play. So not a lot of people were on him. And so sometimes in
Cordell Patterson was the one that got him.
Cordell Patterson for sure. But that's what I'm saying. Like, there are always those weeks where I think there was a Jonathan Taylor against the Bills last year. right? Like it happens every year where there are these really good players that are in not optimal positions that we see win guys tournaments because people are like, well, I don't know. Don't get me wrong. Like there are some weeks finding that 4K guy that goes for 20 plus wins the week. But there's also weeks where, you had to have Derrick Henry or you had to have Jonathan Taylor when they were just not in an optimum position. So that's how I approach, especially like single entry and 3-max tournaments, is not trying to create some super low ownership lineup that would win me 150 max. It's about trying to put together a good, solid correlated lineup that is not exactly a cash game, right? It's a little more, because we talk about in cash games, you don't necessarily need to be correlated. You don't need to even have a stack in cash games, right? It's all about playing the best plays. Median projection, right? So when Gerson's talking about projection, we generally talk about median projection, right? That's what your standard projection set is going to spit out. But in cash games, you want to build lineups based on median projection. For GPPs, you're generally being, you're looking at ceiling plays, right? You're looking at ceiling projections, right? I don't know. You tell me, Gerson. You build a lot of lineups based on median projection for GPP?
Yeah, I agree with you. The thing is with projections, you go, like, I think a lot of people think projection, they're like, oh my gosh, Jalen Hurts going to get 21.97 points, Dude, there's a medium range, dude. You always got to go like 4 points below or 2 points higher than that. That's just the medium range, dude. That's not like that's what he's going to hit. I always have what I like to call a 2.5 method. 2.5 below that, 2.5 above that. And I always go, I think, and then we talk about value a lot, right? So I'll explain this to you guys, not you guys, because I know you guys know what it is, but the people. Value is you times your salary by your point. So if a player is $6,000, you have to get, and it's crazy because it's changing by the year, dude. It's changing by the year. It used to be GPP was 3 times value. Now it's almost 3.5 times value.
Yep.
It used to be cash game was 2 times value, right? I believe, Jeff.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And now that's a joke. Now it's like three times value. So what GPP used to be, and I don't blame this. I mean, I hate to not blame, but more like it's the obvious. The industry people have made millions, thousands of dollars by setting up websites and stuff, giving free information, giving articles, podcasts. It's funny because we have that at thegoingfor2.com. So go ahead and do it. Check it out. But there's so much more out there now compared to what it was 6. Jeff, how long have I known you? 7 years?
2015, so that's 7 years. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's a whole different game. It really is.
To give you an idea, how I found out about Jeff was through Facebook. We didn't even know we knew each other, like through his Going for 2 website, because I was subscribed to his newsletter. And then I'm like, wait, is this Going for 2 Jeff Lambert website? And then I reached out to him. I don't even know how we even talked, but now we're here 7 years later. That's how big the industry has gotten. Yeah,
back then it was little. Like back then, my little website, I started doing DFS advice, and before long, I'm hitting 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 views a day just based on DFS. So it was a different time back then. Now there's so many places where you can get all this information and making great lineups. I want to circle back on something that Tim was talking about with ownership and something that you can kind of touch on. I had a guy, just to kind of give an example. It was NBA. It wasn't NFL, but it's very similar, where he was always trying to find that contrarian play, that low-owned guy. And as soon as lock would come, he'd send me a screenshot of his lineup. Like, look at him. He's only 0.5 owned. And I used to tell him, like, but they still have to score fantasy points. Like, just being low owned is not going to help you. They still got to score points. So that's, going on Tim's point there is like, yes, you want those low owned guys, but if the Tyreek Hill this week's going to be a lower owned stud player, he's the one you want. Like, and just taking that leverage play, we call it leverage play, where you're you're looking at where the field is going, and you're going to zig just a little bit. You're not going to go crazy. Just going to take the guy that may have the worst matchup, may have not a great matchup. Maybe it's Mike Evans versus his nemesis in New Orleans, who I can't think of his name right now. The cornerback that he always does bad against. Maybe you play Mike Evans. Lattimore, yes. You play Mike Evans versus Lattimore. Maybe he finally goes off on him. But those kind of things you want to look for as well. And I want to talk a little bit about exposure now too. I know we've talked about ownership and exposure. And Gerson, I'm gonna go to you because exposure is really important for GPPs as far as how much ownership you have of different players. How do you look at your exposure?
So exposure can be two different ways. If you're doing 150 lineup, you divide it by the amount of players you have in your player pool of quarterback, running back, wide receivers, tight end, and defense. And that's basically, you can set a, like I said, Fantasy Cruncher is a great tool, and it allows me to set up my exposure to each position if I wanted to, But then the thing is, I can also allow to, if I have 6 quarterbacks, right, and let's say I have 5 quarterbacks, and I'm doing 150 rosters, that quarterback is going to have 25%. No, yeah. Did I say 5 or 4? I said 5, right?
5, yeah. 20%.
So it's going to be 16.33. So 7. I can't do the math. I'll find out. But it's going to be divided by that. So I'll have 18 rosters of each quarterback. But then I'll run my stack exposure. It'll switch up my wide receivers, running back, tight end with the stack, right? Exposure is important to your lineup build because you have to decide what player you want more exposure to. Like, I can say, you know what? I love Cooper Kupp. That price is too high, but I'm going to go to Allen Robinson because I can get him for half the price. I'm going to set my exposure higher to him. So you change your percentage on the tool. But you can do that even in real life. If you're hand building, you can say, you know what? I'm making 20 rosters this week. I'm going to have 8 rosters of Cooper Kupp and 12 rosters of Allen Robinson, But you have to pick your variance because I can't tell you. During the week, T. Higgins went off for like 40 points. Yeah. And I had legit 30% exposure on him.
Nice. You had a good week.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Jamar Chase didn't do very well. And I had probably like mix and match of him and TJ or Ozama?
Yeah, CJ.
Yeah, Ozama.
And, and like that's the thing. Like, you have to pick your exposure. It's important because your whole player pool, you have to divide it up. And it's hard because it's like Jeff said, we get DM from people like, hey, I have this guy this many times. Well, okay, cool. But I go back to what Jared said in the chat, and I don't mean to go off track here, Jeff, but he said Gerson would say, does your roster have a script? Can you see the story you're trying to? Yeah, I think he means like, does your roster have a story? Is there a script in it? Like, in the way I say it like this, it's like this, right? I'm gonna give you an idea. All right, Chargers versus Raiders, high scoring game, right? Chargers defense is great now. It's gonna be elite. You gotta research this stuff. They've added a lot of defense, Oh, but guess what? That offense can score now. Devontae Adams is there. Okay, if I'm gonna get Derek Carr, let's look at Vegas. What are they saying? Ooh, they're saying the Raiders are minus 3.0. They're not a favorite. Whatever. Okay, that means the Raiders are gonna be trailing, right? So I want Devontae Adams and say Hunter Renfrow, right? Let's say I don't think Zay Jones on the team. I'm not even sure anymore. But I don't think so. Hunter Renfrow, right? And then I'm gonna stack him and come back with Gerald Everett, cheap tight end, right? I'm gonna be like, all right, cool. And then I'm gonna mix and match over and over. Okay, but the thing is, I went from Derek Carr's 5,900, right, to Vegas is thinking that the Raiders are gonna be trailing, so I want my stack of my double wide receivers to be the Raiders player. Then I'm going to Gerald Everett because if the Chargers are scoring and Gerald Everett cheap, that's going to allow me to get flexible spot opening at my running back and my my third wide receiver, or there could be a third wide receiver or running back or something like that, and then my defense. But you have to build a story. And I kid you not, it sounds so stupid that you say this to yourself. Look at your roster and say, what's the story here? And it sucks because you really have to do it. Because, especially when you're doing single entrance, that roster, I play single entrance, I play $150, $50, $100, sometimes the 333, I think it's $300. Dude, yeah. I spend more time on that than my 150 sometimes, because I feel like if I tank that much money that quick on one roster and I didn't have a story to it, then I feel like I failed myself. I didn't do my proper research.
Yeah. Just to kind of go on the story thing, people that come from the season-long world, their rosters don't really tell a story. They drafted a lineup. They try to pick the best players as much as they could, because over a period of time, over a season, it's going to sort of even itself out. But we're talking about one game, one moment. It needs to tell a story. There needs to be a reason why you're playing these players, not just because, they just fit in my lineup and I'm just kind of picking players from random games. You got to have a script there to sort of follow. And I want to go to you real quick. I see you, Gerson. Let me move on to this next point real quick. I'm gonna go to you, Tim, because you're kind of our Vegas guy on the podcast, and you kind of watch the lines and the way things move. Just a little bit about what you look for with Vegas lines.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I looked at, which I talked about earlier, is trying to target the highest scoring games, right? I mean, Vegas, they don't get them always exactly right, but there's a reason they're Vegas, right? They have a good sense of how these games are going to go. So when I pull up, the Vegas lines and I'm looking at the over-unders, the first thing I look at are what are the highest over-unders of the week, right? And then try and target those games. Well, everybody's going to do that. So sometimes what you want to do is maybe target the second highest scoring game or the third highest scoring game and say, hey, if that other game doesn't shoot out like everybody thinks it's going to, and this one does, you get a little bit of leverage there, right? I also use Vegas for determining defense. I think that's one of the best indicators for picking a defense, right? Home, favored. It's also a great pick for running backs too, right? They have shown that, home favored running backs by 8 or more tend to outscore their estimated fantasy production, right? So these are, again, things that are good indicators of, what a good play would be, right? They start checking all these boxes for you. For me, I like to target high over-under games for stacking. I like to target low over-under games for defenses. And I'm not afraid, and this is what I was kind of touching on earlier, is I'm not afraid of what people call blowouts, right? Like in the NFL, you'll have sometimes where, you get like that 42-10 game that I mentioned earlier. But a lot of times you'll end up getting the, 40-30 type game, where if you don't have, a ton of exposure to that game, then you're just kind of sitting on your hands come Sunday afternoon. So I did want to touch on something we talked about earlier. I know you want to talk about Gerson, but I don't want to skip over this either. I think that exposure matters more the higher number of lineups that you're entering. So like if you're entering one lineup and you're putting it in a cash game and in a tournament, then okay, that's one approach. If you're doing a 3 max, I think, for example, he used Cooper Kupp last year, right? If you're playing 3 lineups and you have Cooper Kupp in 2 of the 3, that's 66 exposure, right? Gerson would never really, realistically have 66 exposure to any given player, right? That's not real life, right? I don't care how much he loves a player on a given week. He's not.
My heart would be beating like this if I hear breaking news. Right. Hey, breaking news. Saquon Barkley just grabbed his leg. I'd be like,
yeah, exactly. So that's how I think if you're approaching 3 max, 20 max, I think is when you really have to start thinking about exposure, and then everything above 20 max is when it's a real thing. But if you're building 1 lineup or 2 lineups or 3 lineups out there, get the best plays in that lineup. Maybe pick 1 or 2 guys that are a little different. But don't be sitting there sweating your percentages like Gerson does on his exposures.
Agreed. That's a good point. That's a very good point. And Tim, one more thing on the Vegas lines. Talk about line movement, because you talk about that a lot on the show as well.
I love line movement. Yeah, that's a big thing for me, because things happen throughout the week, right? The original Vegas lines that come out, was it Tuesday, Wednesday for the next week, are based on what they think is going to happen on that given day. Like, I'll give you a perfect example that happened this week, right? Big news this week for the Dallas Cowboys is that they lost their left tackle, Tyron Smith. If that kind of thing happens during the week, it can move the line a little bit. Now, usually a quarterback injury will obviously move a line the most, but sometimes you'll see even these line injuries start to move, lines a little bit because they know, we saw what happened during that, was it the Bucks and Chiefs Super Bowl? Offensive line injuries are huge, and we really start to see the impact that they have. So, you will hear us talk about on our Friday shows, hey, we got the final, camp reports out or practice reports, and this guy's probable or this guy's, unlikely to play. And that's why we talked about, Sunday mornings. It's not just for the offensive players that you're wanting to play. It's how many guys are going to be out on that offensive line. And do you want any exposure to that team? Or are you going to try and pivot and go with the other team's defense because they're about to get wrecked? And you guys know I love defense. That's one of my favorite ways to predict fantasy scoring defenses is targeting teams that have a lot of injuries along the offensive line. Because the margin in line play, right? Like you have your Myles Garrett's and your Bosa's and stuff like that, but there's also a lot of jobbers in the middle, and a guy that is a starting offensive lineman to the, practice squad level replacement is a huge gap. And a lot of these teams, particularly left tackles, sometimes those interior linemen, those injuries can shift a week almost as much as any other position on the field.
Yeah, I mean, the line movement sometimes isn't the obvious stuff. Like you mentioned, quarterback obviously going to move the line. Sometimes there's things that, we may not even know what's going on because Vegas has people on the ground, looking at these things and constantly changing things based on that. So when you see a line moving, there's a reason it's moving. And then sometimes, like you mentioned, offensive alignment may not be quite as obvious. So that's something definitely to pay attention to as the week rolls on. So great thing. All right, let's move on to value and ROI and points per dollar. And Gerson, I know this is something that you talk about a lot, times value and what that means and ROI and points per dollar. Just kind of give me just a brief sort of Barney version of value and how you look at it.
ROI is your return of interest, basically what you invested into your entrance. Let's say I'm playing 150 rosters, and it's costing me, I believe they have it right now, it's what, $10 a team?
What, the Millie Maker is $5?
Oh, $5. So that's going to cost me 5 times 150 is $600.
$750.
Okay, whatever. Okay, fucking smash genius. You fucking nerd. No, I'm kidding. No, I love you, Tim. So return of interest is basically what you profit, You put in 750 and you lose or you win, right? So say I put $750 every week and then I win, let's say I win $10,000, right? But then you evaluate your difference throughout the whole season, I mean, trust me, you're going to have draws. You're going to have losses. Yep. And there's sometimes it can be very long or it can be very short. Or you can be very great like Jared and $15,000 in 1 week.
Yeah.
Or, exactly. I mean, like, I've won over $100,000. I've won $50,000. I've won $20,000. I won thousands a week. But the thing is, in the long term, you have to be very good at it. And return of interest to me is always going to be, what can I get in return on my investment, And it's critical, guys. Don't be that guy. And I early on, I raised my hand like this because tell me you guys don't remember this commercial. Wow, I won $100. Yeah, I drafted Peyton Manning, Edgerrin James, Adrian Peterson, Randy Moss. They and come and play at DraftKings. They used to have so many freaking commercials for DraftKings.
They did.
That it was ridiculous, thinking that an average fantasy player could just come in and do it just like it was easy.
Yeah.
You can tell right now we're telling you this strategy show is not easy.
No.
So
No,
Definitely.
we talked about the edges. In a lot of ways, the edge is gone, and I'll be the first one to say I think the edge is really gone in cash games for most people. I think that most people have a good enough projection set these days. There aren't people out there making a lot of just off the wall contrarian lineups in cash. There's always a little bit of an edge every week, but you don't see people. We used to see people putting like, oh, I'm going to take my season long team and put them on DraftKings, right? That doesn't really happen
There's a guy out there
anymore.
that's going to win a million maker like that, too.
You know.
Oh, my fantasy team won. Oh, my God.
No.
Hey,
No, I mean
please.
it's a great way to win because nobody does that anymore. But your chances, and that's what we're really talking about here, right? It's improving your chances to win. Because like we talked about earlier with that Cam Newton example, nailing every slot becomes infinitely harder than trying to pick the right games that shoot out and then picking the right exposures to that game, right? Like that's just infinitely easier to do. But the reason I play cash games, and I know a lot of other people do, is a way to kind of offset. And like you said, for our ROI, is make sure that we stay positive, right? Where we can kind of ride out some of those peaks and valleys and not have major changes to our bankroll. I like Gerson, he's out there even on the $20 weeks dropping 3,000 on the Millie Maker. And then, like you said, he's got his single entrances and all these other things. And, you got to, when you do that, like I said earlier, you got to hit some, right? Because you can't just ride that wave forever and just keep going down. So even the really good people same thing as betting, right? Or poker, right? Really good people in the industry have, 10% ROI, 12% ROI. Like that's considered really good, right? So, everybody's not out there winning massive amounts of money, and some people are, but that's definitely the exception.
This
The
is a
funny
personal
thing.
shout.
Go ahead, Harrison. Go ahead.
I have to get this out there, Jeff.
Yeah.
And this is me talking to you as like, not you, Jeff and Tim, because you guys already know this. I'm talking to the people out there like face to face, eye to eye. Guys, play with the money that you have. Don't play with your bills. Don't play with your house. Don't play with money that is priority.
Yeah.
Play with extra money. I like to call it fun bucks.
Yep.
Fun money. Whatever you
Play
want.
within yourself for sure. Yep, for sure.
Your stripper money, whatever you want. Play with the money. I when people tell me, oh, gee, you do DFS? I'm like, yeah. And they tell me, hey, can I do it? I'm like, all right, I'm going to tell you this. I consider DFS an investment. I don't consider it gambling. I don't consider it, for fun. I consider it an investment. It's like the stock market. It's like a normal job where you want to go in. Your friend tells you, hey, you want to go into this business and invest this? That's all I'm doing. I'm investing my money into my knowledge and research every week in, week out. And I put in a lot of time. These guys will tell you, I'll be on a shadow. I will do the Sunday show. I will do the Friday show. But in the end, in between those times, I am cracking out numbers. I am researching. I'm listening to podcasts. And I'll disagree with these guys, and I'll agree with them. And then I learn. That's the thing. Like, play with the money you have.
Yeah.
Not make it personal, but don't be that guy that next thing you know, you're $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 in debt. Be smart about it.
Be smart for sure. So the funny thing I have on ROI, just to kind of circle back there a little bit, is something that pisses me off that DraftKings does. You get that little note. So you have a bad week. Let's say you played $100. You have a bad week, but you had a few lineups that won some money.
Yeah.
They'll send you that email like you won $7.
$8.
You're like, no, I didn't. I lost.
Those are the stone worst. Yeah, I wish I could disable those emails. Those are the absolute worst.
Actually,
well, like Gerson's like I said, a GPP lineup player, MME. So he's always going to cash some, right? So he'll always get that message no matter what. It's just like, oh yeah, it's great. I put $3,000 in this week and I won back $250. Great week.
Exactly.
But yeah, no, I play a lot. You guys know this. I play a lot of head-to-head games. I find that for my ROI on head-to-head games are pretty high. And this is something else, by the way. I don't know if you had this on here. I guess maybe we could put this under contest selection, but I especially, if you're out there playing a few dollars each week, having fun, whatever, do your thing. But if you're like Gerson, and you're really out there grinding it and trying to win the big money, you should be tracking what tournaments and what games you're profitable in, right? If you're just out there flying blind and just trying to like guess it, or like, oh, I think I usually profit well in these tournaments, you're not going to be profitable long term. You're not going to be maxing out that profitability. There are plenty of tools out there. Again, I don't want to do a shout out, but like Roto Tracker, things like that, where you can plug in, hey, I have my best ROI is in these 3-man games, or these 5-man games, or in these 3,000 person tournaments. And then you can target those, right? And continue building your bankroll that way. Everybody doesn't have to win the same way, and I talked earlier about leagues lineups. I think that most people, if you're not familiar, these are the 5, 10, 20, even 50-man, 100-man games that you play, where you're not trying to beat, like we said, a couple 100,000 people, right? You're trying to beat 20, 25 of your buddies. And if those are the games that you're playing each and every week, then trying to target it like a massive GPP is probably suboptimal. It's not, you're not gaining anything there, right? I think personally that you have to have some mix when you're at a lower bankroll. Right? Like, I don't think if you play you could play all cash games. Like, I know our buddy Scott plays mostly cash games. But we've told the Matt story before about, you got to always throw in at least one tournament. But on the flip side, I also think if you're a low dollar player and you're playing purely GPPs, that's a tough road too. Right? So your strategy, and we'll talk about it again, contest selection. Your contest selection should fit your bankroll, right? If you're only playing $20 a week and that $20 is throwing one Millie Maker entry in, I mean, that's fun. Like, if that's your entertainment, like you said, if that's your fun bucks, go for it. But if you're really treating it like an investment, that's not optimal.
Yep, agreed. So we kind of touched on most of what's left on the show sheet here. I just want to, kind of point out a few things that we haven't touched on yet. And one of them I want to talk about in roster construction there. We touched on hand-built lineups and optimizers. We touched on, how to pick defenses and stuff. But punting positions, I know Gerson, in us in general, I think we all kind of punt the tight end. We punt the defense a lot of times. But give me your thoughts, Gerson, on what punting means really, and then exactly how you go about punting a position.
I'm so done with the whole punting thing. Like, really, what you're trying to say, best value. That's what you're trying to say. Let's stop beating around the bush, guys. It's the best value, because you can punt a position, sure, but really in reality, let's say you want to punt defense every week, right? And you just go, oh yeah, well, I like the Lions this week because they're $2,000. It doesn't mean that they're going to get you 6 points. What you really should be looking for by punting, we should be looking for value, because if I think Rondell Moore week 1 probably going to be one of the highest popular choice, and he's like $4,000. That's cheap as shit for a wide receiver.
And for someone that's going to get a ton of like targets and the PPR nature of things there. So yeah, I agree. That's a good point.
So that's just my personal opinion has changed a lot from punting a position to a value position.
Yeah.
But I get what you're trying to say. Like, if we want to punt quarterback, tight end, cool. But like, also, I mean, the two most, if we were to use the term punting, tight end and defense are the ones that everybody punts.
Yeah. Just going back to the hand-built lineups, I also do hand-built lineups. I don't do what Gerson does and use the optimizers. But the way I always start my lineups is I scroll all the way down to defense and scroll all the way to the bottom and pick the best cheap defense that I think I can build. So I'm like pick one of the bottom 3 guys, and then I build a roster from there. And then if I have money left over, I might go back to my defense and see if I can maybe pick a better one. But I always start with defense first because it's the cheapest. You can scroll down to $2,000, build a lineup around that $2,000 and see what you can put in there. And then if you have to upgrade defense from there, you can. But that's kind of how I built my hand-built lineups. Defense pretty much.
I like to pay up a little bit at defense. You guys know that. But I agree. Most weeks you're going to be looking at those two positions to punt. Week 1 is obviously a little bit different because DraftKings releases the salary so early that you get some of these camp guys that win jobs and are min-priced at every year. You end up, and we didn't talk about this. I don't know if this is one of the things you put on here, but roster construction in the sense of it's all about what is kind of the chalk for that week, right? And I think that's the thing about DFS. I don't know, again, if it's on the sheet, but not only we say at DFS, right? Like every week you have a new lineup, but every week you have a new strategy, or you should be.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
If you're going into every week saying, "Hey, I'm definitely paying up for quarterback this week," or "I'm definitely paying up for running back this week," I think you're already behind the curve, right? In a lot of ways, we have to take the value that comes to us, because if you just ignore it, you're probably again not going to be profitable long term. You might be able to get through a week or 2 weeks. But one of the reasons we live and die by the news is we live and die by the value that is produced from that news.
Yep.
Right. So if you don't understand, first of all, obviously watch the Sunday show where Garrison gives you the answers to the test. But if you don't understand how an injury impacts somebody else, it's not always as simple as, hey, the next guy up is just going to get all of that target volume or whatever the case may be. The next running back, oh, well, he's the number 2 guy. He's guaranteed to get all of the same touch volume. There are roles and there are things where if you're not familiar with these teams, it's not as simple as just plug and play.
Yeah, perfect example of that is like the running back position. If you got the starter, the Jonathan Taylor, for example, with Nyheim Hines, if JT goes down, Nyheim Hines not necessarily is the next man up.
Yeah,
Keep Nyheim Hines in his passing down and move up the number 3 running back and Taylor role for that week. So knowing those kind of things can really help you out with lineups.
Let me give you an idea here, guys. It was 2 years ago, Antonio Gibson got announced as starter. Week 1, he was almost minimum price. You know how many points he got week 1? He got 5 points.
Yeah.
Just because they were the minimum price, just because they were announced through the news, does not mean it's going to be the best play. And like sometimes we say, tune in on that Friday show, we'll give our opinion. And sometimes we agree with each other, sometimes we don't, and sometimes we're right, and sometimes we're wrong. But
yeah, I think the darling this week, I think for week 1 right now, is he had a huge game yesterday, preseason game, is Dameon Pierce. I was trying to look up his price there, but Dameon Pierce has been so hyped up that I'd imagine he's gonna be pretty highly owned come week 1, just because of how well he's been.
I just traded him.
You just traded him.
Of course. Yep. And you got to take advantage of that week 1, man. That's the other thing is we've seen it before where we get news Sunday morning right before lock. Oh, this is another thing. I don't think, did you have that in here? All right. Before I didn't want to jump ahead again. Late swap, right? This is another thing that I think is not utilized enough, right? People have won big money utilizing late swap, right? So we always talk about in your lineups, you always want your latest player in the flex. It's to give you flexibility. It's not just, oh, well, they might be injured, so I'm going to put them in the flex. No, it's to give you the maximum amount of flexibility for how the late games play out. Because you have a lineup that's looking really good in the early games and your late game, all of your late game exposure is chalky. There's a good chance that somebody else is going to have that same lineup, but you may be able to make one change that you wouldn't have been able to make if you had them in a locked position. And you're like, hey, suddenly this 2v2 swap has a similar median projection to what I have, but the ownership projection is like half, right? Yeah. So then you're like, if this plays out the way that I think it will, I actually give myself a real shot to win this tournament that I wouldn't have if I wouldn't have put that player in the flex, right? Yeah. So don't expect your lineups to be set it and forget it when you lock on Sunday morning. Like at my time, it's noon, right? At noon lock, my morning players lock, but I'm watching those afternoon games to just see, hey, like this week is a good example. We talked about this a minute ago, right? Like an Austin Eckler versus Devontae Adams, right? I think both of them are going to be pretty highly owned, so it may not be a good example. But if it turns out everybody's going to pay down for running back week 1, and you can get Austin Eckler at a huge ownership discount he's still in a great position, then I might be looking at Devontae Adams in the afternoon and think, okay, I'm going to switch that out to Austin Eckler. got a similar ceiling at a much lower ownership.
Yeah, yes. To go on that point as well. I mean, I was going to bring up an example. A couple years ago, it seemed like Todd Gurley was always in that 4 p.m. game, and he was always really highly owned. And if I'm looking at my lineups and going into the 4 p.m. games, and I have Todd Gurley, and I'm not cashing at that point, I'm changing Todd Gurley to somebody else because I already know that everybody else is going to have Todd Gurley. So if I'm already not cashing, I need to take Todd Gurley out, put somebody else in there to give me a chance to sort of leverage the field to get up there and get cashing. So kind of on the same point there is making sure you check those 4 p.m.
It also works if you're doing badly, by the way. If your lineup's not doing really well and you have a very chalky guy going in the afternoon, chances are that guy's not going to bring you back. So pivoting to somebody less chalky may be able to bring you back if the other guy. And I want to shout out real quick Brian Clark in the chat. This dude has an incredible ability to sniff out the bad chalk. He tells us all the time, he comes out with these lineups and we look at it and these are so contrarian, but they make sense. And I think that you can be contrarian if your lineups make sense. You don't always have to eat the chalk, right? There's a reason it's chalk, but there are also, like he just said, there are weeks where the chalk is going to score 5 points. And if you fade the chalk that week, you will have a massive advantage over the rest of the field.
What's our favorite saying on the show, guys? Don't get cute.
Yeah.
Don't get cute. Sometimes you just got to do what the field is doing sometimes.
Yeah, man. That's it. I tell you guys this, like, to me, the biggest difference that I've learned in the last 3 years since the industry has gotten so much bigger is that you want to be different, but don't be an idiot.
Yeah.
That's
exactly.
all.
Play the good plays. I think that's the easiest way. It seems so basic, but I think people get too caught up in trying to be different and trying, like you said, to get cute, that they're not playing the good plays. And sometimes it's, it's not. We make it harder than it has to be. It's hard, right? I'm not going to pretend that it's not hard, but you also make it harder than it has to be. So
agreed. So let's close out the show here with just a couple of our favorite sites, our favorite tools that we use during the season. We named a few already. I know Gerson's a big proponent of Fantasy Cruncher. He uses that quite a bit. That's a pretty expensive tool. So if you're an average casual player, that's not something you necessarily would want to have. But Tim, I'll go to you first. Give me a couple of your sites that you use that you like to look at, whether it's Monday, Tuesday, or even at the end of the week.
Yeah, I mean, I use Fantasy Labs for their Vegas tool. I think it's the best Vegas tool in the industry. It shows you the open line, the current line, shows you the movement. They're really good about keeping that updated. That's one of my favorite tools. I use it every week. We also always talk about the Roto Grinders First Look. I don't know if they're going to do that again this year, but assuming they do, that's where I think all of us start our week. That and with Vegas, it contains the Vegas lines on the First Look as well. And then the last thing, I always shout this out every year, but it continues to be a resource for me, is Mike Clay's wide receiver cornerback matchup sheet. You get that through ESPN Plus. It's $5 a month, and in my opinion, for that one sheet alone, it's worth it. Sometimes cornerback wide receiver matchups are a little bit of noise, but sometimes they really do matter. And knowing which ones are noise and which ones matter are another great way to get an advantage in an industry where there's not a lot of edge.
Agreed. Gerson, what about you? Besides Fantasy Cruncher, is there any other tools that you use, whether you're doing research or anything for the show that you use besides Fantasy Cruncher?
All right, hold on. Let me check my bookmarks. 35 of them. Okay. Where do I start? No, I'm just kidding. I think Fantasy Cruncher is number one. One of my favorite websites, and it's only been there for like 2 years now, I believe. FantasyPoint.com. One of the best. They have a lot of good writers. They have a lot of good people there. Listen to their podcasts and stuff. Actually, I lied to you guys. That's not number one. Number one is goingfor2.com.
Yes, sir.
Shameless plug. No
kickers.
But yeah, Fantasy Point, Roto Grinders, and Fantasy Cruncher are the tools I mainly use. But I'm not gonna lie to you guys. I do a lot of individual research for myself. I block the noise and I just go with my gut. I mean, these guys will tell you, I say I don't give a fuck a lot because I don't. Like, I will, my money, I invest in myself. Like, what I read and what I listen can be one thing, but what I do is the main thing.
Yeah, I think one of my favorite tools is Roto Grinders as well, and a lot of their tools are free, which is nice. And I think the ownership tool, I don't know if that one's free or not, because I do have a premium prescription to that one, but the ownership tool is pretty good there, I think. And I look at that a lot just to know, who the chalk is, because they are a pretty large site. So when they have all these people that are clicking on certain names and it changes their ownership percentages, I think that kind of helps me to sort of get my start for the week, and then obviously look towards the end of the week and see who's being owned the most and how I want to approach that. So that's probably my biggest one. All right,
I want to one more thing before we move on. We didn't talk about this earlier, and I know it's going to be a big part of our show this season. So I kind of want this to be my lasting message. Is that I think it's important, whether you play 150 lineups or one lineup, to have kind of your guy every week. Right? Because, I mean, we have a certain amount of money we have to allocate. We know who the good plays are. But I think going into a week, you kind of want to plant your flag on somebody, whether it be, if you're doing 150 lineups, like Gerson said, who am I going to have a higher percentage of this week? Who am I going to go a little overweight on? Because, you can, if you just try and float along, right? Like you're not going to be different. But the easiest way to be different is just plant your flag on somebody, right? I don't care. None of the shows talked about this guy this week, but I think he's a really great play. Then play him, right? Because if you're right, you get a massive advantage on everybody else.
Yeah.
So
Tim kind of plugged it a little bit, so I'm gonna go ahead and get some more. This year we're gonna be adding lock it in player. We'll each have one as we're going through our breakdown, and when they do their lock in player, you'll hear this drop.
Lock it in.
So you'll hear that on our lock it in players.
Jameis Winston for Jeff Lambert. Jeff Lambert 77 is picking Jameis Winston every freaking week.
Every week. And Jimmy Garoppolo too, right? Jimmy Garoppolo seems to be my guy.
Hey, I do want to give one last shout out. Joe mentioned this in the chat, and I have to shout them out. I want to shout out the guys at 4 for 4. I use them for their projections and a number of other things, but one of the things is TJ Hernandez, who runs DFS over at 4 for 4. Every week he puts out incredible information for free on Twitter. We talked about, Gerson said at the top of the show, if you're not on Twitter, you're behind. This is one of the best reasons. He provides, who was the winning Millie Maker lineup? What did their breakdown look like? Over the course of the season, what are people allocating to their lineups for running back 1, running back 2, and trends and all kinds of things. And all of these things are given away free on Twitter. And so if you are in the group, I usually try to aggregate all these graphs and charts and all kinds of things on a thread that we do each week in the chat. But I have to give a shout out to TJ, because a lot of the stuff, late round QB, Hayden Winks at Underdog, there are a ton of guys that I steal info from on Twitter to share with you guys, and so I couldn't do it without them.
Yeah, I agree.
Any parting thoughts, guys? Anything y'all want to say before we get out of here? Anything we didn't touch on y'all want to mention real quick, Gerson?
I think, like I said, play smart, be smart, and just don't get carried away, man. Like, play within your budget. I think I tell a lot of people, and if you really want to see what the fantasy industry of DFS is like, go look up on YouTube. I think his name was Condia with established to run
ETR,
and you'll really know what this industry can be like. You can be the best player in the world, and you can be a player that can go very depressed. This industry is not for the, I like to say, the bunch of pussies. I mean, you have to be really mentally prepared, and you have to put in the grind. But at the same time, if you're just here to have fun, you can have fun. It's fun. Like every Sunday, I wake up every Sunday. I have my little, I used to have a mocho frappuccino from Starbucks, but now I have water or something, and then just enjoy it. This is fun. This is fantasy football. This is DFS. I mean, we love waking up every Sunday for what? Our favorite scene at what is it? Come on, you guys remind me. The red zone. What did he say?
8 hours of commercial-free football starts now.
That's our favorite thing. Boom.
There's nothing better than that. Absolutely
That's
not.
perfect. So Gerson, since you can't have your macchiato or whatever in the morning, you can always our newest sponsor, energy drinks, W Energy.
There you go.
Drinks.
Get you some W Energy.
WGG promo code GF2.
I do. I want that Dragonade personally. That sounds amazing.
Yeah, I want to try it too.
Hey,
all right, fellas.
Can't wait. When would check us out for the week 1 show, Jeff? When's it coming up?
So yeah, week 1, it'll be the Friday after the first Thursday game. So what is that? The 8th,
That's
I
the
believe.
9th?
The 9th, the 9th. So it'll be the 9th. So the show's going to vary a little bit. It'll either be 10:30 or 11:30, depending on my work schedule. Hopefully it's more 10:30s than 11:30s, but I will make sure to put all that out there once we get closer to that time frame. But we'll be live every Friday night. And like Gerson mentioned, he'll be on the Sunday show in the morning. And check out all of our Going for Two live shows. We have, I think, 11 shows this year. We have literally one show every day. We have a double header on Friday, and we got a triple header on Saturdays now. So we got everything. We even have we've got an IDP show on Saturday. We've got a Dynasty show on Saturday. We have the DFS Pawn Shop coming back this year. They do a great job on Saturday nights. The B League's got his own show now. He's doing pick'ems. So if you play underdog pick'ems, he's doing a pick'em show on Friday before our show. So he'll be like leading up to our show on Friday. So we got all kinds of stuff going on this year. So it's going to be a ton of fun. So definitely go there and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Obviously, you can find us on Spotify, iTunes, all that good stuff. So one last time, let's go around the room. Tim, give us your Twitter handle. Obviously, plug the Facebook group one more time. Anything else you want to talk about?
At Keto DFS on Twitter. Like I talked about, the DFS Armchair round. Sorry, DFS. I'm done here. Okay. Good night, everybody. No, DFS Armchair Roundtable. We changed it, and I can't get it out now.
Yeah,
okay?
It's difficult.
The DFS Armchair Roundtable on Facebook is where I'm going to be posting my thread every week. I would say get in there, but apparently I can't even know.
Jason Cat's game on Sunday is fire.
Yeah,
I don't know
that's
if you
true.
can do it, but I swear people are cashing in at least 60 to 70%, or maybe not 70, but 60% at least on a year.
Yeah, the polls we had in the group last year were pretty fire. I mean, consistently the winners of the polls every week were scoring well. So TFS Armchair. Oh, yes, I'm done. Can't wait. That's exactly right, Joe. Can't wait.
2
weeks away, y'all. We will be grinding all of your week 1 projections for the next 2 weeks. So be ready.
Stuff. But Gerson, where can we find you at?
You can find me at Fantasy GDFS on Twitter. You can find me on the Friday show, of course, with Tim and Jeff. You can find me on the Sunday show with Gladys, Zach, Jamie, and myself for the first half hour of the show. After that, I will be off. Maybe you'll get lucky if news aren't too crazy, or I think I can stay on and cover fantasy with them. But always tune in, because Sundays I'll give you the answer to the test.
All right, guys. As always, you can follow me on Twitter at Jeff Lambert77, and I will be live Wednesdays and Fridays. Wednesdays is our season-long show with Ryan Searfoss, and then Friday, of course, I'm here with these guys shooting the shit every Friday night. We have a lot of fun, so if you haven't checked the show out before now, definitely check it out this year. I think we put on a pretty good show. So for Gerson, for Tim, I'm Jeff. We will see y'all in like 2 weeks. So I'm ready.
Go Pack, go, baby.
There it is. I was waiting for it.
Peace.